Hello everyone, my name is Miranda, but you probably know me by my Instagram name at Mother of Serpents. Today I'm going to try to make a genetics video for people. It's really going to depend on if my camera dies in the middle of it, but as of right now, that's the goal. So I get asked a lot about ball python genetics, like, oh, should I breed my what to my what? People who are looking for breeding advice, they just don't really have that much of an understanding of ball python genetics, and I get it. There's so much to learn, so it makes a lot of sense that it has taken years for most people to kind of get a basic hang of things for this knowledge. Like, it's not something that you can just learn in an afternoon. So hopefully this video is going to help people get just kind of a general understanding of ball python genetics. The first thing to understand is that there are three main different types of genes when it comes to ball pythons, and that is dominant, incomplete dominant, and recessive. Of course, there's a normal and classic wild type ball python, which is the ones that you would just find in the wild. They are a very slept on ball python. Not many people want normals. If you're involved in Facebook ball python groups, it's always just people like, oh, this was sold to me as a normal. Is it really anything else? And that's always kind of strange to me, because if you're not planning on breeding and you just have a pet, the color of the snake isn't going to change with how it interacts with you. It's not going to change anything except the visual appearance. So even if it is a different morph, it really shouldn't matter that much. So I don't know what's up with that. I can kind of understand it, I guess, from a breeding perspective if you think you got ripped off, or maybe, but if you think you got ripped off from a breeder, maybe don't buy from that breeder and actually buy from a reputable one. That's never really made much sense to me either. Back to genetics. So you got the classic wild types that you would find in Africa. Next up, you have dominant genes. And dominant genes are something such as calico, chocolate, and pinstripe. There are no super forms of this morph, so there are no super chocolates, super calicos, or super pinstripes. They're just single gene ball pythons. And if you were to breed, say, a pinstripe to a normal, genetically speaking or scientifically speaking, you would get about 50% of pinstripes and 50% normals. So only one parent needs to carry a copy of the gene pinstripe in order for it to show up in babies. The next one is incomplete dominant, and I actually have an example of an incomplete dominant right here. This is Cinnamon Girl. She is my cinnamon ball python who is also 100% het for pied. So what incomplete dominant is, it's a morph also kind of similar to dominant, as in only one parent needs to carry a copy of the gene for it to show up in offspring. So if I were to breed Cinnamon Girl to a normal, the ratio should be about 50% cinnamons and 50% normal ball pythons. However, incomplete dominants also have something called superforms that completely change basically the look of the snake. So if I were to breed Cinnamon Girl to another cinnamon ball python, I would have a 50% chance of getting super cinnamon ball pythons, which are all black, kind of like a charcoaly snake. Some other examples of incomplete dominant include Pastel. You can get super pastels, super bananas, super yellow bellies, also known as ivories. And a lot of times the super form will drastically change the outlook of the snake. Like, two yellow bellies to the untrained eye may look like two normals, but if you breed them together, then you get an all-white snake with a little bit of yellow coloration on the head. So super forms do a lot of really cool things. If you breed a super form to a normal, it will only throw off. So say I had a super cinnamon that I bred to a normal, the clutch would just be all cinnamons. You cannot make a normal if you have a clutch of supers. So anything, another example is if you were to breed a super banana to a black pastel, you would only get bananas, banana black pastels. You would not get any single gene black pastels. So next up we have recessive. And I have Serpents out here, who is an example of a recessive ball python. He is a cinnamon pied ball python. He seems to be a little on the slithery side today, so I might not have him out the whole time I'm talking about this, depending on how, or if he decides to settle down, I'm not really sure. So some examples of recessive would include pied, obviously, candino, albino, and clown. So what recessive means is that both parents have to carry a copy of the gene in order for the offspring to be visual. So what that means is if I were to breed Serpents to a normal ball python, I would only get normals and cinnamons that are 100% het for pied. And what het means is that basically the snake carries a copy of the gene, but you can't see it. There are a few hets that you can see, but for the most part you cannot. You just kind of have to breed them out to prove that they carry the gene. If I were to breed a het to a visual, I would probably get 50% pieds and 50% normal het for pied. And if I were to breed a visual pied to a visual pied, I would get 100% visuals, no hets. They would all just be regular pied ball pythons. If you were to breed a het to a het, so a normal ball python that is het for pied bred to another normal ball python that is het for pied, you would have a 25% chance to hit a visual and a 75% chance of just getting normals who are 66% het for pied. What that means is that the snake has a 66% chance of carrying the pied gene. So Serpants is doing pretty good, so I'm going to keep him out for a little bit more while I talk about some other things involved in the morphs. So there's another really popular morph of snake called blue-eyed leucistics, commonly shortened to just blue-eyed lucies or just BELs. There are a lot of different morphs that you can use to make blue-eyed lucies. So when you hear the term blue-eyed lucy, it simply refers to all white snakes with blue eyes as a whole. There's usually not one specific morph unless stated otherwise. So the list of snakes that can create blue-eyed lucies are lesser and butter, Russo, Mojave. Basically, you can use any sort of those combinations of snakes to create a blue-eyed lucy. You can breed a Mojave to a lesser and get blue-eyed lucies, a Russo to a lesser, and you will still get all white snakes with blue eyes. The one kind of exception to this is super Mojaves have a purple head with blue eyes, and they normally have a yellow dorsal stripe that develops over time as they age and shed. In a video a couple weeks ago, I also did touch upon a little bit of irresponsible breeding with the cinnamon and black pastel gene and the spider wobble, and those aren't the only issues that are linked to morphs, so I'm going to start going over those a little bit. Serpants is getting a little antsy, so I'm going to put him back and swap him out for another snake that's going to do better while I talk about this. Alright, so I have Delia out, who, if you didn't know, she is a pewter hidden gene Woma ball python who was kind of appropriate for this conversation because, as I had mentioned in my last video, while spiders do have a very prominent wobble, the other morphs that do have the wobble are hidden gene Woma, champagne, super sable, and super spot nose. She does not have a visual wobble. If I'm feeding her, I won't be able to see her kind of wiggle a little bit. Wobble is definitely more prominent in spiders than it is any other morph of ball python, but that doesn't mean that those other morphs listed, they're wobble free. They do have it. It is just nowhere near as severe as the wobble when it comes to spiders. You can see Delia here, she's going to be looking around. There's no head shaking, she's not twisting upside down. She has a pretty good sense of where she is for the most part, and she's just gonna kind of snake around and do her own thing and hopefully not bite me in the face on camera. It's also a really good idea, a really good thing to point out that all of the morphs linked to wobble should never ever be bred together. Hidden gene Woma should never be bred to spider. Champagne should never be bred to super spot nose. Champagne should never be bred to spider. Champagne should never be bred to champagne. Spider should never be bred to spider. Don't do it. All of the offspring will die. It's just a good idea. It's irresponsible breeding if you were to try to. Many people have tried to prove that such thing as a super spider exists, and technically it does. It produces an all-white snake that just dies shortly after hatching, if it even hatches at all. If you decide to breed these two morphs together, then you're just breeding for the sake of killing animals, and that's really horrible. So it's already been done. You don't need to experiment to see if you will produce viable offspring. It's been done by many people before, and it never produces viable offspring. If you want to breed, choose wisely. Do not pick morphs such as these and breed them together. Another genetic issue that pops up in actually blue-eyed lucies, I believe specifically super butters and super lessers, would be bug eyes. So you will have snakes that have larger than normal eyes that look like they're bugging out. This can also be an issue with super cinnamons, I believe. They do not have the kinking. Blue-eyed lucies don't have the kinking that is linked to the super cinnamon gene. It is just the bug eyes. This does not affect the snake's quality of life. It just simply makes them look like they're very surprised all the time. A lot of people consider it undesirable because it's not a perfect specimen, but really if it doesn't affect the snake at all, I think it looks kind of cool. Never breed a snake specifically so that it has bug eyes, but I would definitely adopt one that did. Mystic Potion pieds and I believe butter pieds have also been linked to the opposite problem, so their eyes are a bit smaller than normal. Honestly, Mystic Potion Pieds are very creepy looking snakes to me. They're all white snakes with maybe a little bit of pattern on them, and they have very small, almost concave looking eyes that are bright red, and they really freak me out. Like, I love ball pythons, but honestly, I would never want a Mystic Potion Pied. They look kind of evil to me. Like, I'm gonna attach a picture so that people can see what I'm talking about. The last expo that I went to, they actually had Mystic Potion Pieds, and they are just as terrifying in person as they are in pictures. In the last video, I did touch upon how Super Cinnamons and Super Black Pastels and 8 Balls, they have the issue with kinking and duck billing and bug eyes, and just how all sorts of issues are linked to those super forms. However, I don't know if I mentioned this in the last video, there is a line of Black Pastel called the E and G line, where if you were to breed 2 E and G line Black Pastel ball pythons together, sorry that's a mouthful, the offspring would not be kinked, they would be healthy and viable. Unfortunately, because of this, E and G line Black Pastels do tend to be very expensive because people are taking advantage of the fact that they can create perfect all black snakes, since so many people have failed to do so. It's important to point out that there are 2 different morphs. One is called the Desert and the other is called Desert Ghost. So Desert Ghost is a recessive gene and there are no issues linked to this morph. However, Desert is a dominant morph that the females cannot lay eggs. They have, for some reason, there's fertility issues in the females, and every single time they become gravid, they will become egg-bound, and if they do not receive immediate vet care, they will die. And I don't even think that the eggs are viable. I believe that they are all just slugs. These females cannot breed. If you have a desert female ball python, she needs to be pet only. The males can be bred just as regular. There are no issues with the males. I believe Caramel Albino also has this issue with female fertility. So if you have either of those morphs that are females, pet only, don't breed them if you care about the snake. You honestly have no reason to breed them if they're not going to produce offspring. Many people have tried, it just doesn't work, so there's no need for anyone to kind of conduct their own little experiments to try to prove something wrong. It's been done many times for years and with the same results, just don't do it. Now, something else that kind of confuses people when it comes to genetics is there are something, I don't think there's a proper term for it, but there are the same morphs but different lines. So back when ball python morphs were first being, bred out and people were really starting to get into all the different morphs of ball pythons, 2 people would acquire the same morph, but they would name it different things and thus it would create different lines. So some examples of this would be Banana and Coral Glow. They look the same, but it's just technically different lines. They are the same gene, just with 2 different names. Some other examples would be Toffee and Toffino and Candy and Candino. Butter and Lesser are the same. Sugar and Calico. Ghost and Hypo are the same, Phantom and Mystic are the same, and Microscale and Scaleless are the exact same. This kind of is going to wrap up the rest of the video. However, I did want to end on the note with paradoxes and chimeras. So paradoxes and chimeras are basically genetic anomalies that occur in the egg. They are not genetic and cannot be reproduced. They're essentially really cool freaks of nature. However, there are 2 different morphs that seem to throw a lot of paradoxes and chimeras, and that's bananas and champagnes. This also brings me to my next topic, which is line breeding, and I'm really not going to get into line breeding too much, but what it is, so say I really liked Delia's pattern and I wanted to recreate it, so I would probably contact someone who had her brother and I would ask if I could breed her to her brother to try to replicate the pattern that both clutch mates had. And essentially, you are breeding for desirable traits. If I really liked this, again, if I really liked her pattern, I would try to keep breeding her to her family so that I could keep recreating the patterns and producing ball pythons that had the desirable trait. This is not something that occurs in just ball pythons. It is really all snakes and reptiles. And recently there's been some debate about whether or not this is ethical, about whether or not this produces, a lot of severe issues way down the line. And people make the argument that in the wild, most ball pythons are inbred. They don't travel very far. It's very likely that ball pythons are inbreeding in the wild, so why shouldn't they do it in captivity? And the argument for that is when they are kept in captivity, it is our job to make sure that they are safe and that things like this that usually happen in the wild don't occur, and we can keep them as happy and safe as we can. So something that happens a lot is people ask if you can breed for personality of snakes rather than just how they look. So say you were to breed two ball pythons that were really docile together, if that would produce a clutch of all really docile snakes. And the answer to this is that it hasn't really been explored in most breeders. I have asked a couple of them if this is the case, if this is possible, and all of them have said that they haven't really noticed. There's a couple reasons for this, and the first one is that a lot of the times the babies are sold before you really get a chance to handle them. A lot of times people will post pictures of them right out of the egg, and people will make deposits, and as soon as they're ready, they'll be shipped out. So there's honestly no really real way to gauge how the babies are going to interact in comparison to how the parents are. And the other reason for that is because a lot of times people don't really handle their ball pythons a lot. A lot of big breeders, these are just, you know, they're pets, that's for sure, but it's not like they're going to have these out and hanging out with them on the couch while they're watching a movie. These are just, you know, feed, maintain, and breed. And that's not to say that they're neglecting them or abusing them, because as long as they're kept in correct husbandry, like, there's nothing to worry about. So I guess to answer that question, there really is no solid evidence at this point in time about if you can actually replicate, you know, temperaments in ball pythons. I have heard both kind of conflicting answers, that each one is just going to have their own temperament and there's really no way you can breed that in or out, and that it's really, if you breed two docile snakes together, you can. So maybe that's something that I'll have to try years from now and see if there's any truth to it. Definitely gonna breed Elton to a really calm snake and see if there's really calm offspring. I don't know if people know this, but a lot of times ball python hatchlings are extremely feisty, extremely defensive, probably the most likely to get bit by hatchlings than you are an adult. They just think that they're really tough and scared of everything, and that's not the case. A lot of them do calm down and grow out of it. And I always do get a lot of questions about people asking me what they should breed their ball python to. They're like, hey, I have this fire and she's spinner, what should I breed it to? And the answer to this is breed it to whatever you want to. There's really no way for me to give advice to that, because it's all what you are interested in. Like, never breed something based on someone else's interest. Take a peruse down Morph Market and see what jumps out to you, see what you like, and then work from there. Because if you start working with what you love, that's when you are going to get passion, that's when you're going to love what you do, instead of just like, eh. It's just really rewarding when you do something that you want to do instead of seeking the approval of others. And lastly, to close on this, I know a lot of people are probably going to ask, like, oh, can you help us identify different morphs? Like, how do I know if a banana is a banana? How do I know if it has another gene in it? And the answer to that, I'm sorry, is that that would be way too long of a video for me to do and get into. And there are so many different factors. Morphs differ very greatly, so you can have two very different looking cinnamons, two very different looking bananas, but that doesn't mean that they're not what they're listed as. So the only thing you can really do, again, I would suggest using Morph Market as a tool and really familiarizing yourself with these different morphs so that slowly you can start identifying what's what. I would also suggest joining lots of groups on Facebook for morph identification, because that's a really good way to practice. And as a disclaimer to close out this video, I would just like to say that I have accumulated this knowledge over years of researching and keeping ball pythons, as well as Ball Python Enthusiast Genetic Guide, Morph Market's genetics calculator. So if you ever have a question about what pairing to do to a snake and what offspring you can produce if you have two morphs, Morph Market is a great way. It will tell you what morphs you can produce. It'll also show you the percentage in which you will create them. Both are very good tools for beginners and advanced keepers alike. So always just make sure to check out Morph Market. Great tool to use. I think that's about covers it for the genetics video. Let me know what you guys want to see next week, and I will see you then. Take care, guys.